Hi everyone. Thanks so much for being here. Gender and homelessness. You folks are here. We just noted this is the last session at the very end of the program, and we're so thrilled that you're here. Um, Want to acknowledge that we're here on the traditional and ancestral territories of the Mi'kmaq peoples. Really honored to be here and to welcome all of you here for last session of the conference. Um, for folks who are looking at your agenda, there's three talks today, but our first talk, the talk by Jacqueline, how to create and maintain a lived advisory framework that leads the way. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to join us this morning. So we have a new, expanded, very exciting panel here who's has a couple of presentations for you. I'm going to let folks introduce themselves. We do have translators in the back for anyone who speaks French, so we're going to do our best to speak slowly for translation. But very, very honored to have you here. We're exploring the issue of gender and homelessness. As all of you folks know, homelessness is absolutely a gendered experience. It's very much intertwined with the rights of women and gender diverse folks. We know that the feminization of poverty is tremendously significant, that there's huge intersections with gender based violence, and that there's been systemic underfunding for gender specific shelters, gender specific housing. So, panelists today are going to be talking about kind of new innovative paths forward as we're looking at this as an issue, both in terms of gender, equity, rights, but also kind of what does a better future look like for us. So thank you so much for being here. I'll have the panelists introduce themselves.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Caitlin, for that excellent context setting. My name is Jenny Vengris, and I'm a faculty member in the School of Social Work at McMaster University, and really happy to be here this morning to talk to you about an initiative we've undertaken in Hamilton, Ontario, over the past few years. It's really nice to get this initiative on the national stage, and hopefully we have time for questions and answers at the end to hear any feedback or suggestions that you might have. As Caitlin mentioned, we found out that one of our presentations that was actually declined from CAEH, we found out yesterday that it was accepted. And so you'll see we have two titles on our slides. We've amalgamated it into one presentation, and we're really happy to present it to you today. Let me introduce you to my colleagues. Val Sadler is here, Associate Executive Director at Mission Services Hamilton, and Mary Vaccaro is here, and she is a faculty member in the School of Social Work as well at McMaster University, and we are from Hamilton, Ontario. The three of us represent a very small group compared to the folks who actually offered input, advice, direction, their stories themselves in this project. So I just want to recognize that the way this project was made possible was through the engagement and input of so many community partners, primarily people with lived experience, frontline staff, and some managers and directors of social service organizations, particularly those who focus on gender-based housing and homelessness in Hamilton. We're going to talk about a project that we undertook in 2020. That year probably, sounds familiar to you. It's when COVID-19 hit in a big way in Canada. We're not going to talk much about how that impacted our work, but it did impact our process in a really significant way. And this was a project that we undertook. I'll talk a bit more about the context, but really to try to make traction in our community on a complex policy issue. Um, Val is going to talk about sort of the community perspective. We're talking about something called a Community University Policy Alliance. So, Val will talk about the community perspective, the process, and her very unique involvement in our what we call our CUPA, and myself and Mary will talk about the project. We'll talk about some of our process and the resultant report that we developed. And we'll end with some sort of key learnings or key lessons from the project that we did. So, the presentation objectives are to learn about participatory policy advocacy that involved people with lived experience, academics, nonprofit organizational leadership, and frontline staff. We're going to share some of the key policy and practice recommendations that we made as they relate to gender-based homelessness. And we'll reflect on some of those lessons learned. So let me just talk to you about the kind of context, how we got started in this Community University Policy Alliance with a focus on gender-based housing. So we're from the School of Social Work at McMaster, and we received a really generous donation from the estate of someone called Dr. Richard Splain. Those of you who know Dr. Richard Splain, he was a social worker who really invested his career in thinking about working on our social safety net here in Canada. And he was instrumental in sort of bringing a social work perspective to that social safety net. And he felt strongly that social workers should be involved in the development, the analysis, and the critique of social policy. And so he left, through his estate, generous donations to 3 schools of social work, including McMaster University, to advance the study of social policy. Mary Vaccaro and I were lucky to receive the sort of inaugural project through Dr. Richard Splain's estate. And we ended up, through work with the community, which Val will talk about, and work at McMaster, in forming what we called a Community University Policy Alliance, or CUPA. And the aim of this was to bring community and academic stakeholders together to work on complex policy issues. It was really important, and I'll say that it was really Mary Vaccaro, who has a lot of experience in the homelessness sector, that we were working toward real, tangible change. And then the academics around the table, not that Mary's not an academic, but the academics around the table really wanted to make sure as we worked on that tangible policy change, we were documenting and figuring out how change happens. So this was a partnership between the School of Social Work and gender-specific homelessness serving organizations. And with that, representing some of those gender-specific homelessness serving organizations, I'll turn it over to Val Sadler, who will talk about the community, sort of the process that we undertook with the community.
Okay. So, women experiencing homelessness was on the radar of the academics, and largely through Mary's involvement, the academics that were leading CUPA. And so, women's complex homelessness was determined to be the first social issue that was to be reviewed and tackled, which thrilled me because that's largely the population that we serve. Those are the women that we serve in my organization. So, Willow's Place is part of Mission Services. It's a low barrier drop in for women experiencing homelessness. And during the pandemic, we added a 15-bed shelter, an overnight shelter. And almost all of the women that we serve have complex needs. So, women experiencing complex homelessness was defined as women whose experiences of homelessness are complex and whose current housing needs remain unmet within the current social welfare system. The focus would be on women without children in their care and who experience multiple barriers, including profound trauma, significant mental illness, substance use, social isolation, and poverty. It's important to note that this group of women who often survive despite these multiple barriers, their capacity for survival and demonstrations of care of those around them should not be overlooked and needed to be recognized. And we see strength and resiliency demonstrated over and over in our shelter and drop in, as I'm sure most of you do as well. An idea exchange was held early in the CUPA process, and that was attended by 14 community agencies and funders, folks who serve and support women experiencing complex homelessness. The participants were stakeholders from across the housing and homelessness and health sectors to talk about policy barriers that women experiencing complex homelessness face. Underpinning the discussion were 3 critical concepts in the discourse around women's homelessness: housing as a human right, trauma and working through an equity and gender lens, and trauma. The conversations were invigorating, but there was a collective frustration in the room because we've all been talking about these concepts for so long as a system and has seen little impact on our programs and services. From that idea exchange, 8 clear themes emerged through small group discussions about the policy barriers that women experience in accessing and sustaining affordable housing and safe affordable housing. And that's no surprise here. These are the themes that many of you are familiar with: trauma, isolation and loneliness, health, mental health, abilities and substance use, a fractured system of care, an oversubscribed and under-resourced women's homelessness system, barriers to accessing housing, and barriers to sustain housing once accessed, and intersecting oppressions and inequity. It was very intentional to find new ways to link McMaster University and the community agencies. So 2 ways that we did this within CUPA was linking Mary and Jenny with an existing community systems table called the Women's Housing Planning Collaborative, or as we call it in Hamilton, WIPIC. They became regular members of WIPIC. So that was bringing academia into the community table. The other way, moving from community to the university field, was to have someone from the community enroll in McMaster's graduate diploma through the School of Social Work. And that diploma is Community Engaged Research and Evaluation to further the work of CUPA. And I was approached and I accepted this opportunity. One of the takeaways from continually attending meetings, and we attend, as you know, a lot of meetings in the community, is not so much who's sitting around the table, but who's not sitting at the table. And key gaps, and this is from my perspective, the folks that were always missing were healthcare and academia. And what I saw very clearly through my academic journey was, at least from the academic sector, there's an eagerness on both sides to share learning and to find ways to work together and find solutions. We know that in the community, we're often approached by researchers in universities who are working on research around homelessness, and they want to come in. They need to access us because they need to come in and interview and meet with our service users. And many times, there's no connection to the researcher. We don't know them. There's no connection even to the university. Sometimes they're not even local. They could be even in a different province. So this learning experience demonstrated that with community-based research, the community and the university could and should be partners in the research, not just when the interviews are needed, but long before that, and even during the development of the proposal. So we often have the same goals, but are working in parallel with each other, and alliances like CUPA promoted this kind of change. So the work that I did as a student, one of the assignments that I did was to help support, all of the work that I did was to help support or hopefully advance the work of CUPA. I did a literature review with the aim to explore the ways in which women who were chronically homeless succeeded and become stably housed. So, how did that happen? What were the positives? What were the things that allowed them to stay housed? And 7 key themes emerged from my lit review, and I'll give you a very, very brief overview of each theme. So the first one is permanent supportive housing programs. So permanent supportive housing is the most, according to my lit review, is the most effective strategy to end homelessness for chronically homeless with substance use and mental health challenges. And we must find a balance between honoring client choices and being guided by evidence that tells us that treatment for concurrent disorders will help with housing retention. So how do we respond if somebody wants to be housed but doesn't want to enter treatment? Independent living skills were described by both consumers and staff of permanent supportive housing services as being critically needed. Social skills was the next theme that emerged. A U.S. study identified 24 social skills that enable housing attainment and retention, and they studied individuals with serious mental illness living in scattered site permanent supportive housing. And these skills fell under these domains. So, using your time well, getting close to people, your finances, avoiding problems with drugs and alcohol, solving interpersonal problems, and managing your health. One of the limitations, no surprise, that I found in the research was a lot of the research studies, many of the research participants were both male and female. They didn't often distinguish between both. So there was really a gender lens was missing on a lot of the research. And it was hard to find research specifically on women experiencing complex homelessness. The next theme I'll talk about is positive social supports and social networks. Women experiencing homelessness reported more relatives as members of their social networks than men, but also reported greater number of relatives with whom they engaged in conflict. So, a bit of a catch-22. Increasing social support may help those with poor mental health, and those stories of homelessness respond to, those folks experiencing homelessness respond to stressors, including the stress of becoming housed. And there is a stress and often a real fear when housing is found. And it's to the point where we see women at Willow's Place sabotage their housing placement because they're so fearful to leave their current situation, which is known, and enter the unknown of housing. Although it sounds, that it's a solution, but sometimes to them it can be very problematic. The transition to housing means losing some of the social supports they relied on during their episodes of homelessness. So they've created a network of support that they will now lose if they're housed. Housing quality was another theme that emerged, and a couple of key points that I found interesting. Despite the evidence around the quality of housing and characteristics of neighborhoods, housing and neighborhood, housing quality is rarely measured in housing interventions. Usually it's just simple provision of housing is captured. So you just check off they found housing, but we don't really analyze what type of housing and if they've met the criteria of what we would call quality housing. In one study where participants had choice, some clients accepted an inferior quality unit, but it was in a preferred neighborhood. And there are standardized tools that measure features of the unit, the building, and the neighborhood. I'm not sure that many of our housing providers use these tools. The next theme that I found really interesting, and I love what I learned about this, was a community of women. And I love this because we see this so often at Willow's Place. And it's just one of the greatest things about Willow's Place is the community that they build. So it was no surprise to read about this. I read a lot about transitional housing and that it gives women a sense of community, a sense of belonging. They have peer support, connection, they have relationships, and a communal space to gather. So transitional housing gives them time to heal, gives them time to rest, and time to rebuild. I read about permanent housing that participants identified privacy, independence, safety, and security as the best thing about having their own place. And stability gave them a chance and a space to dream and to stop running. But they have a loss of connection from the transitional program once they're permanently housed. And all women in this particular study agreed that they could not have gone from homelessness directly into permanent housing without entering transitional housing. Community participation and belonging. Individuals living in congregate settings reported more involvement in their community. It was suggested to enhance social inclusion by developing services that are not just organized by income level or offered within low income neighborhoods, but to spread it out and have every area involved. Services could include mobile outreach and service delivery programs. Moving outside the walls was a key priority in creating a home. emphasis on first establishing safety within your own walls. So safety was a big feature in a lot of the articles that I read. Perception and sense of home is the next theme. Permanent supportive housing is the primary driver for change, but this doesn't mean that their housing always feels like home. Moving past a stigmatized or illness focused identity can be instrumental in recovery following the attainment of housing. Feeling settled in one's housing has been connected to housing stability. Research that studied perceptions of home, some themes included or identified included safe spaces, connections to regular stuff, and agency to make choices. Feeling that home is a safe space was the primary feature for participants of whether or not their housing felt like home. Feeling safe means having privacy, place to retreat, find peace and trust, and the ability to be one's authentic self. And allowance of pets was ranked as important for personalizing one's home. So when I finished this and when I took this back to WIPIC, I also created some recommendations for them to consider. And one of them was training and developing programming. So developing social skills, developing training modules for housing support workers that they could offer housed women coping with mental illness. And I think there's, housing first, there's always a focus on, and as I alluded to earlier, folks getting housed, but then what? What do the permanent supports look like, and how do they look different for women? Social skills, we talked about that, training and creating modules that can help both men and women. Housing design, and we'll talk about that later. Women respond to being in a community of women. We know that. We've heard that over and over. Mary has heard that when she's done her own research. Therefore, we should be designing permanent housing models that would provide safety, staffing, security, peer support, and connection. Not for everybody, but for a specific group of women. One of the key themes, but I didn't really include it, but I noted was the emergence of older women in shelters and low barrier drop-in spaces, and we see that in my organization. So we started tracking statistics around women who are 45 plus, and looking at, are we serving them in the best way possible? How do their needs change as they age? Because they are older, and we've got women who are in their late 70s and 80s in a drop-in, and even either precariously housed or experiencing homelessness. So what does that mean for women who are of this age, and how do we serve them with dignity and find support for them? So these suggestions were made and subcommittees were developed. So I was glad to see that some of the learning from the Lit Review was put into practice. And I'll turn it over to Mary.
Thanks, Val. So, our project really was grounded with one fundamental question. And we know that there's been so much literature, as Val has just synthesized. We know that there's community planning tables and there's programs for women and there's housing first models. And yet, at least in Hamilton, there is still a group of people who access women serving organizations who remain persistently unhoused despite multiple intervention options available to them. These are really the group of women that Val is seeing at Willow's Place, that I'm supporting in drop-in programs that I work in at YWCA Hamilton, who have interacted with so many points in the system, but never seem to maintain permanent housing. And so that was really the focus of our project and the focus of our CUPA. And as we started thinking about this, we know that in Hamilton, housing interventions are not designed with gender in mind. And they're certainly not designed to address the very complex barriers that this population of women face. The housing market is really inaccessible to many people. And at least in Hamilton, if we are using an acuity scale such as the VI SPDAT, we're really missing people who have the highest acuity. They actually aren't being served by any intervention in our city. The housing market is inaccessible, and the service system is extremely under-resourced, which means people who have the most complex needs are often first to be asked to leave services. They're first to be barred or restricted from services. They often struggle to even maintain an emergency shelter. And we know that this is because the system is under-resourced and staff are experiencing, high turnover and burnout, and they're really unable to attend to the complexity of the service needs of the population that they're serving. And there's also persistent stigma for people who face the most barriers to housing. So I will now talk a little bit about how we engaged in some other aspects of the CUPA. So Val did the lit review, and Jenny and I did, I guess, what we called the Community University Policy Alliance, that really brought together people with lived experience and also really elevated the perspectives of frontline service providers who are often have really wise ideas but aren't invited into planning tables, often aren't consulted as experts in their fields. But I will note that due to COVID-19, there were some restrictions on in-person meetings. So this was difficult to really meaningfully involve people with lived experience of complex homelessness. I was doing my PhD research at the same time, and so I was able to talk to 23 women who experienced complex homelessness about their ideas for permanent housing. And so the quotes that you see through the presentation is from that study. And I did that virtually with the support of community organizations who would set people up on laptops. But we did also hire 2 women who have experienced complex homelessness in Hamilton to be policy consultants on our project, and they were paid members of our project team through the project grant. I would be remiss to not mention that one of those women has since passed away from a drug poisoning, which I think really just speaks to the complexity of what is happening in the suffering of this population of women. But we were able to work with those women, and they really contributed to our project, and they were able to attend virtually. Okay. And so we started to ask women, what is it that would sort of resolve this experience of housing for you? And I'll just share a couple of quotes. So one woman who's 52 years old, who's experienced 14 years of homelessness, says, finding something permanent just does not seem possible. You stay here for a bit, go there for a bit, then you can stay here for 11 months, then you go back there for a bit. I really just need to find a permanent place to live. Another woman says, I use drugs, right? And every time I go to a shelter to get the help I need, I just get kicked out and judged. There needs to be housing place for women who use drugs. Another woman says, I know I definitely want patience from staff, someone there to talk to in the night or when I am on my way out for the day, someone to help me stay on track and organized with all of the things I'm supposed to do. So really what we're hearing from women is their ideas about the type of housing that they want. And we believe that the answer to this really is low barrier permanent housing with supports. And so low barrier housing is intentionally designed to meet the needs of people who have been systematically excluded from accessing traditional market rent housing. And adding a gendered lens to that would make this a really appropriate model for this particular population that CUPA is focused on. Models of low barrier housing provide intensive on-site support, offer flexible tenancy agreements, and are responsive to the needs of tenants, and foster intentional and meaningful community between the people that live there and those that work in the building. Unlike other housing models, low barrier housing screens people in based on the complexity of their needs instead of screens people out based on the complexity of their needs. Some key principles that we heard from both community partners and women with lived experience was that this type of housing needs to be anti-colonial. It needs to be developed in partnership with Indigenous-led organizations, mobilizing support in ways that resonate with the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls report and the Truth and Reconciliation calls to justice and action. We know that a low barrier approach requires partnerships with organizations that are committed to reducing barriers to access, that this needs to be informed, trauma and violence informed, and it has to have a harm reduction focus, and not just like kind of a lip service to harm reduction focus, but it needs to be explicitly developed for people who use drugs. And of course, it needs to be gender based with a recognition and a deep consideration in all aspects of the program design about how gender impacts people's experiences of housing and homelessness. So some key elements of this model with supports that we are advocating for that we've heard from community partners and, of course, from the lived experts who we involved is that it needs to be small. No more than 15 people occupying one housing project. And when we asked women with lived experience the ideal number, we routinely heard that the ideal number of tenants would be 8 to 12 people. We heard that co-housing is an essential part of the model, and Val touched upon that in her literature review. That community is particularly important for women, that loneliness and isolation are factors that contribute to homelessness, and that a co-housing model would mean that people are living in independent units but have space on site where they could build relationships and community. That this needs to be highly supportive, meaning that there would be a range of core support staff on staff at all times, with in-reach services coming in to supplement the range of other necessary services needed, tailored to the needs of each resident. That it would be permanent in nature, so not transitional, and that people would be leaseholders to ensure that their rights are upheld, that they would not be, living there under a program agreement. It needs to center community, which means peer support and mutual aid relationships need to be funded aspects of the housing program, and women with lived experience need to be hired to fill those peer support roles. And again, it needs to be harm reduction focused and explicitly designed for people who use drugs. So 2 quotes again from women were, a lot of the women I've noticed in the homeless community do stick together. You know what? Even the women don't realize it, but they are their own support group. I've heard a lot of them sit there and say they have nobody in their corner. And sometimes I would say, what's that? You've got 10 women right here, right now, and they're listening to every word you're saying. And another woman said, peers are able to help too. It would be a very big encouragement for the people that they help. I think peers should be involved in the harm reduction stuff and in the day-to-day stuff like cooking, cleaning, and doing stuff around the house. So again, our report and our advocacy work focuses on sort of 6 core elements to gender-specific low-barrier co-housing for women. Supports, so on-site, in-reach supports, the staffing model, the community building, harm reduction, tenants' rights, and infrastructure. We were really interested to hear how clearly women articulated wanting small co-housing settings. That cannot be understated. And I will pass it over to Jenny to talk a little bit more about the integration of policy and practice through our project.
So, this very long, complex, intentional community academic partnership resulted in this report that really put forward a model that we felt was clear in the literature and very clear in the people that we talked to, primarily people with experience and frontline staff in Hamilton. At the end of the presentation, which you'll have access to the slides, we have a link to the report. So we've given you a taste of it. You can see a lot of really pragmatic recommendations for how we might move this forward. But you might remember when I first came up here, I said that this was fundamentally a policy-focused project. And so we wanted to make sure that this CUPA attended both to those pragmatic elements, but also the broader policy gaps and the possibilities that need to be in place to make this happen. These policy gaps will not be new to you. These are the policy gaps that you live in your communities as well. But some of them include organizational policy barriers. So we hear about service restrictions. Mary talked about how the people with the most complex needs are often those who are most often turned away. And I think we're pretty clear that the reason for that is lack of resources in the sector. We've got underpaid, precarious frontline staff who are holding up services that are meant to support people who are coming with very I don't want to say complex needs, complex barriers. The second big policy barrier that we found was the lack of meaningful data and capacity for sector planning. So Like Val said, Mary and I had the privilege of joining the Women's Housing Planning Collaborative, where we could see a lot of well intentioned and incredibly hard work. But also, we could see that the way data is collected and analyzed, and the way organizations are set up to compete against each other for funding, meant that that sort of capacity for sector planning was continually undermined. And I'll offer a shout out to Val Sadler, who I heard say so many times in those meetings, how can we find a way to come together, trust each other, and actually try to plan a system of services that will work for women? Um, we've got a really, you know, this if you work in any sort of social service, there's a really clear focus on outcomes. So you need to prove that your service is the reason that a woman got housed, right? Not another service, that it was your service. And so this neoliberal focus on outcomes and kind of proving yourself year after year after year really undermines the ability, as Mary said, for people to come together, focus on this important group of people in our community. And then it's not just about housing and the homelessness sector. We know when we work in homelessness that the broader eroded social safety net means that there's all kinds of intersecting policy gaps. So I've been working in housing and homelessness in some capacity for almost 25 years. We have been calling for an increase to social assistance in Ontario. You probably have in your province as well for just as long, right? So if we've got incredibly low incomes, increasingly unaffordable housing, wait lists for mental health supports, lack of harm reduction, you can see how the broader policy system creates these gaps that make it really hard to find traction on this issue. And so, what we decided to do in the report was to have practice recommendations that say the housing should be small, that the staffing model should look like this. We also wanted to recognize that without a recognition that there is a broader system that undermines the capacity for organizations to do this work, it's just going to be speaking into the void. And so, in addition to these pragmatic practice recommendations, we have a series of policy recommendations as well. Um, and we've put these into sort of three categories: partnerships, sector planning, and funding, which obviously are really interconnected. I'll just give you an example of some of the policy recommendations we make. For example, municipal planning processes that identify possible land and existing infrastructure need to be better connected to our social service system and nonprofit developers. I want to talk about three. We learned so many lessons. We learned a lot of lessons through this project, but I want to talk about three lessons that we learned. Um, and first, and this feels like, there's this academic focused on empirical evidence and, getting the right data. But I think what we found out really early on was that in order to do this work well, we needed relationships, trust, and intuitive decision making as central to this work. So we all, three of us, have extensive histories of working in the housing and homelessness sector. I think if Mary and I came into this project, I don't know what you think, Val, and we were not known to the community at all, I'm not sure that we could have made any sort of traction. Um, and we have an understanding of the role that various levels of policy, who the decision makers are, how the sector operates. So to enter in with that knowledge was really critical. We know, frustratingly, that advocacy is slow moving, but it's also strategic and thoughtful. Our advocacy work has taken a very long time. And I want to talk about one of the tensions, and I don't know if you feel this too, that Mary and I talked about a lot in our work, which is this sort of balancing the relational and adversarial approaches to advocacy. So, in some moments, we felt like this system requires critique, and there's a real urgency for this change. And so, what we wanted to do was write, an op-ed that shamed whoever was responsible, because it felt so frustrating that we were, particularly with our policy consultants, who we were seeing experiencing housing insecurity through the project. There was real urgency for that change. But then on the other side of that, we're balancing this idea that, okay, ad, this policy advocacy needs trust and relationships. So we need to bring decision makers on side with us. And we were constantly kind of moving between those two. And I don't know that we landed that one approach is better. And that our third lesson is really that unexpected voices have critical contributions to community planning and advocacy work. So typical community planning processes engage people with already institutionally situated power, folks like directors, managers, etc. But it became clear early on, and this was really through the urging of Mary, having done a lot of frontline work in the sector, that our process had to center the voices of frontline staff and people with lived experience who have the most grounded and fundamental knowledge about how to move forward. And I think that project is richer, more relevant, and more effective. I think what we've come up with will work more than other, ways we've conceived of housing in the Hamilton community. And I think the other thing, if you do choose to read the report, is that the frontline staff and people with lived experience lent a kind of urgency to the report that I think and hope speaks to decision makers. So, our next step, the report landed in Hamilton during the Omicron outbreak of COVID-19. I don't know what it was like in your community, but it felt like the community was sort of figuring out public health measures until Omicron. And all of a sudden, things fell apart in a really big way. And so, when the report actually came out, it didn't get the traction it deserved. We continue to talk about this model in Hamilton. And really, the place where we situate our advocacy now is in the residential care facility system. This is a relatively unique system in Hamilton. We rely on it heavily to house folks who are homeless. And we know that it is, if you're familiar with Hamilton's residential care facility system, it is not without issue. But we do think that there's something about the model we're proposing and the model of the residential care facility system that works. And so we continue to work with the city. We will continue to work with the city to talk about how the residential care facility system can be better utilized to support the small but very important group of people who access women serving homelessness services for whom the current housing interventions are just not working. We just have our contact information up here and also a link to the guide. Many thanks for your attention, and hopefully we get some time for Q&A at the end.
That was fantastic. So much insight there. I really resonated with your point around the tension with relational and adversarial advocacy. This is so. I saw a range of folks nodding their head. It's incredibly difficult and strategic process to kind of map that out. So thank you so much for the work that you folks do. It is my pleasure to introduce Samantha and Arlene from the region of Peel, who are going to be talking about human trafficking. We can't ask them to leave if we don't offer a safe place to stay. So thanks for listening. Thank you.
I'm just going to kind of switch over. Maybe I need your help with that. Thank you. Thank you. Do anything else? Or we're good? Okay, that's perfect. Wonderful. We do have a video, but if we can,
So we can fill time.
okay. Thank you. Just sort of this presentation. Yeah.
While we get the tech set up, can I ask folks a question? How many of you in the room know that we're going to have a human rights review at a national level on gendered homelessness next year? Okay, a few folks. This is great. For folks who don't know, the Federal Housing Advocate identified homelessness amongst women and gender diverse folks as like the most urgent human rights issue facing Canada. It's the first human rights claim through the new human rights architecture in Canada that's been moving to the National Housing Council for review. So that might sound like a lot of jargon, but the point is there's an opportunity at a policy level to make a huge impact when it comes to women and gender diverse folks' homelessness. So, yeah. Thank you so much. Yes. So I'm imagining many of you have been fighting this issue for many years. The National Housing Council They put out recommendations after this review, and the Minister of Housing has to respond in 120 days in the Senate and the House of Commons. So there has to be a response. It has to be in the public sphere. And there's an opportunity for all of you, the folks you work with, to create written submissions and oral submissions in this like, and kind of go through a deputation process. So the reason I'm highlighting this is like many of the policy issues that we're talking about today. This is a really important venue for all of us to be bringing this forward. And as a movement, I really think it's an opportunity for us to get organized. So I lead the Women's National Housing and Homelessness Network. If you check out our website, womenshomelessness.ca, like sign up to our newsletter where this is all of our energy, all of like many late nights kind of coming up in preparation for this and hoping to support folks like yourselves to engage in this human rights process. So thanks very much.
That's great. So thank you, everybody. I'm Sam. I am a registered nurse and a sexual assault nurse examiner. I've been practicing for 23 years, and I'm also the advisor of the Peel Anti-Human Sex Trafficking Strategy at the region of Peel. And we are very proud to say that in Ontario, we were the first municipality to have both a sex trafficking strategy along with funded dedicated services for victims, survivors, and individuals at risk of sex trafficking. And Arlene, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Arlene. I'm the manager of the Anti-Sex Trafficking program. Happy to be here and share our model with you.
And I think this follows so well because all your evidence that you showed about the model of housing individuals and the number fits very nicely with our model as well. So I think it's very reciprocal. So we did a land acknowledgement. Thank you, Caitlin. The yellow box here is where we're situated as the region of Peel in the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation sessions from 1781 to 1820 and Rogue Track Claim of 2015. Our learning objectives are to better understand how to identify warning signs of sex trafficking, build confidence in identifying those at risk of or engaged in sex trafficking, and identify referral pathways to safe housing options for victim survivors and individuals at risk. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of just kind of a quick and dirty as to kind of some warning signs to look out for, some of the context around human sex trafficking, and then Arlene will go into our strategy and kind of how it came to be. So the Criminal Code of Canada, and I'll read it because it's legalese, is the criminal is the defined as the recruitment, transportation, transfer, receipt, holding, concealing, or harboring a person, or exercising control, direction, or influence over the movements of a person for the purpose of exploiting them or facilitating their exploitation. So we do know that there's many forms of human trafficking. There's labor, there's domestic servitude, there's organs trafficking, forced marriage. In this session, we are going to focus on sex trafficking. And that's not to say that many different forms of trafficking don't coexist. We know that sex trafficking is a form of labor trafficking as well. And I will take this opportunity to just talk about a bit of a paradigm shift that I'm a lifelong learner, but one paradigm shift that really resonated with me with some training that I was doing with individuals with lived experience recently. And we all hear this term of survival sex. And survival sex has been a term for many years about individuals that need to engage in sexual acts to meet their basic needs, to trade for shelter, to trade for food. And anyone under the age of 18 in Canada, if they trade anything for sex, it's considered sexual exploitation and it's against the law. So the paradigm shift is, and I think what's very empowering from learning from individuals that have lived through being exploited sexually is that they're not engaging in survival sex. They're actually being sexually exploited, and that is against the law. And it's they are a victim of a crime that is committed against their body, and their body carries with them. The crime scene will carry with them throughout their life. So the trauma that is embedded in engaging in survival sex for basic needs, to meet basic needs, again, speaks to you, Caitlin, about the human rights and the violation of someone's body to literally live. So going into a bit of the statistics. So we know that the vast majority of individuals that are identified in the statistics are Canadian citizens or permanent residents. And oftentimes individuals that think about sex trafficking or think about any trafficking is somebody is, kidnapped and brought over an international border. And we know in Canada that is not our experience. We know that individuals that are being trafficked have been born and raised in Canada or are permanent residents. And so we need to shift our mindset and really understand who we're working with and who might be a victim or a survivor. A victim is a criminal term. A survivor is more of a health kind of based and social policy term. And individuals, at least in my experience, will not disclose their survivorship unless they are provided with a safe space to do so. So never underestimate that someone in the room that you're sitting with is not a survivor of sexual exploitation. Despite making up only 4% of the population, Indigenous women and girls account for over 50% of victims in Canada. Again, this is a staggering stat and one that is incredibly underreported. We know that this is not something that we can dine out on and say definitively this is it. Because, again, when you think of statistics, you have to realize that the people that are able to report are individuals without barriers. And that means this is a crime reported data set. So although these are the statistics we're working with, we know definitively that all statistics are incredibly underreported by virtue of the barriers that individuals face. And 51% of trafficked girls were or had been involved with the child welfare system. Again, not an incredibly surprising statistic. However, in thinking about individuals that we engage with, we know that they don't come as a homeless youth or a homeless woman or a homeless man or a homeless gender diverse individual. They come with so many complexities and so many different identities as well as vulnerabilities. And I'll get into that a little bit more. And I will say about this stat, we talk about girls, we talk about the vast majority of individuals that are able to disclose to police or report to police are female. However, that is not to say that men, boys, and gender diverse populations do not get trafficked. They get trafficked and they are trafficked at an incredible rate. However, the ability to be able to disclose to police, the trust is not there. The ability to be able to feel safe to come forward, the shame, all of these various different stigmas and labels definitely do inhibit individuals from disclosing. So I'm going to try to play this video. And it is from a survivor who I just absolutely admire and think she's wonderful. So I hope you do also enjoy this.
Hi there.
Oh, shoot.
Oh, okay, so maybe.
Yeah. I think it has to be. I don't know. Is our tech guy here? Ultimately, if this doesn't work, it's okay. The link is there. I will say that it is a wonderful video by Ronelle Bruder, who is a Black survivor. And I say that because we need more individuals of color, individuals that identify with marginalized populations and minority populations to be able to be survivor leaders to teach us. I know my privilege. I am a white woman and I've walked in very different shoes. And so Ronelle has a organization called Project iRise, and she takes an incredibly highly nuanced crime and issue and distills it down in 3 minutes to be very understandable and something that you can share with others. And I like it because it's only 3 minutes, and like I say, it takes these complex issues that are very hard for us to explain and really drills it down and helps individuals understand what it is and also what it isn't. So I'll leave this with you. I hope that you will take 3 minutes to view it because it is fantastic. Just gonna get out of this here. I'm gonna go back. Okay, here we are. Okay, So, going into warning signs, in my practice as a sexual assault nurse examiner, I often see individuals that present through domestic violence or physical assault. And in our center, we see anyone over the age of 12 who's been sexually assaulted or involved in intimate partner violence. And when I start to ask questions, and it's not a tick list, I don't wear a uniform, we're in our own clothes, we have conversations. And I think that that's really the one thing that is so important and so viable is having conversations with individuals and providing that safe space. If they choose to disclose, they can. But if they don't choose to disclose, that's okay too, because they know that this is now a safe place to come back to when and if they feel comfortable to do so. So I say that about the physical violence because oftentimes individuals will come in because, and I don't say this to be crass, but because they're only allowed to seek care when there's an issue that's impeding them from being sold. And this is an individual that is a commodity. And I don't say that again, just off the cuff. I say it because this is the reality. And so, an individual that is in need of healthcare or social services is not allowed to go about their lives freely. Even though they're not locked in a room and they're not bound, they don't have the ability to move as they choose. And so, accessing forms of healthcare, social services, those are all controlled by another individual. It could be a female, it could be a male, they could pose as the sister or cousin or friend. Daily activities controlled by others. You might say to that person, "Can you come back on Tuesday at 3?" And they say, I'm not sure. I don't know. And it's not that they're trying to be evasive. It's not that they're trying to be difficult with you. It's the fact that they truly don't know where they're going to be. They may be in Ontario. Tomorrow they might be in Halifax. And the next day they might be in Vancouver. No ID or somebody holding it for them. Oftentimes we have somebody standing beside them. And in our practice at the Region of Peel, we have housing, social income and social support, and childcare fee subsidy. And so we have frontline services that individuals are coming to access, and somebody is holding their ID for them, so they speak for them. Oh, here's her health card, or here's her ID. That is also odd for somebody else to be holding a piece of identification that is power, that is currency, literally. And so another issue is multiple cell phones or no cell phones. The individual will want to be in contact with this person all the time. Also, youth, everybody just seems to have a cell phone. It doesn't matter, where they are at. They seem to have a cell phone. So no cell phone also will send off red flags for us. Unable or unwilling to contact family. This is kind of more in the older youth going into adulthood, where you might say, is there a support person you'd like to have with you? And they say, oh no, like I don't engage with my family, or I live by myself. Protective of the term, my partner, my boyfriend, my girlfriend. I learned very early on, I never villainize anyone because that is the person that is their sole support at this point in time. And oftentimes, many individuals don't know they're being trafficked. We don't talk about, are you being trafficked? That's just not a common term. But thinking that maybe that individual is putting them in a position where they don't feel comfortable doing those things and wouldn't do those things if they had the agency to say no. But like I say, it's to establish a trusting therapeutic relationship. Words matter, and your biases will come through. So being very aware of how you engage. Feel fearful or uncooperative of police or healthcare providers. That's another piece in the sense that an individual has told them, if you say anything, you're going to be deported, or with our experience in the Region of Peel, we have a lot of international students. You're going to be deported. You're going to be charged. A lot of individuals are actually in schools recruiting their friends. They've been recruited, and now they recruit their friends into this. This is somebody that individual trusts, that they know, and they say, I don't want to do this anymore. And the trafficker will say, well, you know what? If you're not going to do it, I'll go get your sister, or I know where you live, or go and get one of your friends from school. So it's very pervasive. It crosses all demographic, economic, cultural, religious identities. And so, risk factor is that an individual is vulnerable and is feeling that they need somebody with them to kind of love them. Another thing that we always talk about is questioning our biases when we're engaging with individuals that are marginalized, and we as service providers might see them as have-nots. Somebody that walks in with their nails done, their eyelashes done, their hair done, they might have a Gucci purse. Oftentimes individuals kind of think, well, why do you need this if you look so put together? But again, if you think of an individual as a commodity and you think of them being sold, it's not their choice. And they're not doing this out of their own free will. This is something that we have to look beyond and really see that as a red flag and not something that we'll, think about as a bias. Oh goodness, there we are. So vulnerabilities. No one comes as, like I said from the beginning, no one comes as a single issue. Everyone has intersections in their lives: identity, race, religion, various different. Whether you're living in poverty, whether you had high ACEs scores, your adverse childhood experiences. This all factors into the barriers that individuals will be faced with. And so these are just a number of different statistics that really highlight the vulnerabilities of individuals. So when you look at 2S TQIA plus, youth are 3 to 7 times more likely to be sexually exploited to exchange sex for shelter, food, or drugs, which puts them at a significant risk for being trafficked. Again, their trading is sexual exploitation and can very well lead to further exploitation, including sex trafficking. 28.2% of those experiencing homelessness are members of racialized groups, compared to the Canadian average of 19.1. These are all things that I'm sure are not surprises to you, but it's really important to identify. Landlord discrimination against Black tenants is a common barrier to adequate housing. Studies in Toronto and Montreal have revealed exclusionary screening methods, refusal to rent, or imposing financial barriers to renting. I talked about the foster system as well. So 52% of children in foster care are Indigenous, but only account for 7.7% of the child population in Canada. And individuals that identify with a disability are the highest minority group in Canada. So they represent 22% of Canadians, which, like I say, makes them the largest group. And oftentimes they rely on services due to their vulnerability. So this is another population. And I will say I've had numerous individuals that I've engaged with, even in the hospital setting, and they've said, I know I'm going to be exploited anyway, so I started to escort myself, and now this person is further exploiting me. And I think it's also, I'm going to go back to that piece around the dialogue and talking about this with individuals and just having those casual conversations, because there's evidence to support that if we're not asking the question, individuals don't feel safe to disclose, and that they are being trafficked, but no one is asking them and providing them that safe space to be able to disclose. And for anyone that's disclosed to me, it's been such a relief, and they've said, nobody's ever asked me that before. So I think that's a really important point. The Polaris report, which is an American report, it was called In Harm's Way: How Systems Fail Human Trafficking Survivors. It notes 3 reported needs at the time of exit. So accessing behavioral or mental health services, service providers that understand my trauma at 75%, finding people I trust and who can care about me and could help me, 73%, and finding a safe place to stay was at 70%. So those were the top 3 needs at time of exit. And obviously the cycle of homelessness continues to perpetuate by virtue of individuals that are being trafficked. It takes on average about 7 attempts to leave before they're able to leave successfully. So being able to provide these 3 basic needs at the time of exit to really help that individual on their journey from exploitation to independence, which is an incredibly long road.
Do you want to say?
Because
I see he's right.
Oh, sure. Would you be willing? I hope everybody's okay.
Yeah.
We're doing the video.
Yeah, I can. Okay. All right. Thank you.
I think it's that's just oh goodness.
Hi there. You may have heard of something called sex trafficking.
I know it's been in the news a lot lately, and you're probably thinking because next time I hear you, I will be planning. Okay. Not to worry. Young Canadian girls and boys, some of the same age as you, or even younger, with all human background releases, become victims of trafficking. Seriously, it's not that nice. I left my lady there. So there's two minutes. Okay. Which we've said. My name is Renelle Heather, and I'm a sex trafficking survivor and anti-trafficking advocate. So what is sex trafficking? It's when a person, generally a vulnerable underage youth, is lured, tricked, and manipulated into selling the body for sex to make out somebody. So how does it happen? It typically starts with luring, where traffickers will enter the house just to take one to like a pool, wall, okay, not wall now. You know what I mean? It's something that seems we hold the microphone on the speaker on social media. Like, hey, beautiful. If they get a reply, that's the first step in the learning process. So try to learn as much as possible about the person. And if this may not seem like a bad thing, the traffickers are using information to manipulate the person later on. Next is the grooming. Traffickers use all the information they gather over plan, emotions, I think we're good. We're good.
Like problems with their parents, school, anxiety, or body image issues. Then they may get love bombed, meaning within a really short period of time,
Yeah.
Sure.
Thanks, folks. Yeah.
called sex trafficking. I know it's been in the news a lot lately, and you're probably thinking it could never happen to you or any of your friends. The truth is, sex trafficking is already happening across Canada. Young Canadian girls and boys, some the same age as you or even younger, and from all different backgrounds and ethnicities, become victims of trafficking. And most of them have no idea it was even happening until it was too late. My name is Renelle Bruder, and I'm a sex trafficking survivor and an anti trafficking advocate. So, what is sex trafficking? It's when a person, generally a vulnerable underage youth, is lured, tricked, and manipulated into selling their body for sex to make money for somebody else. So, how does it happen? It typically starts with luring, where traffickers will look for vulnerable young people to connect with. And this can happen anywhere, like at school, the mall, or even online. It can be something that seems innocent, like sending a message on social media, like, hey, beautiful. If they get a reply, that's the first step in the luring process. Try to learn as much as possible about the person and their life. This may not seem like a bad thing. Traffickers will use this information to manipulate the person later on. Next is the grooming. Traffickers will use all the information they gathered to play in the person's emotions and any insecurities they have, like problems with their parents, school, anxiety, or body image issues. Then they may get love bombed, meaning within a really short period of time, the trafficker showers the victim with attention, expensive gifts, trips, even drugs and alcohol to impair their judgment. Next is the manipulation and control. At this point, the victim thinks the trafficker is their boyfriend, girlfriend, or even best friend. But here, they'll really start to push the boundaries and pressure the victim to do things they aren't comfortable with, while slowly isolating them from family and friends. That's what leads to exploitation. This might start with working in a massage parlor or stripping at a club. They'll tell the victim, it's just this once, or think about how much money they'll make. Then it progresses into sex acts. And if the victim tries to say no or leave, the trafficker may threaten them or become violent. Sex trafficking is real, and it's happening right here to young Canadian women and men. So remember how trafficking happens and talk to a trusted friend or adult if you feel that you or your friends may be in danger. And lastly, if something seems too good to be true, trust your instincts. Thanks for listening.
So there was another slideshow we need to boot up?
Oh, no, it was the same one.
Same one?
I don't
Okay.
know where it went, but it was.
Sorry, I had to close it off.
It's okay.
So,
I know where I want. I should find it.
okay. Perfect.
Okay, just put it up. PowerPoint. 1 minute. Okay. Okay. So while I'm booting it up, my name is Arlene Coventry Bauer. I'm the manager of anti-human sex trafficking. I also take care of all the community investment funding in the region of Peel.
And so that's about 10.3 million. We try to look at it as an ecosystem and let's see where this is. Here it is. And really try to do some of those connector pieces you guys are talking about. So, what do those partnerships look like within an ecosystem? How do we look at systemic issues, whether it's poverty, anti-human sex trafficking, and how do we make sure that that system is working cohesively as best as it can? Because sometimes it doesn't, and we know that, and we heard you guys talk about it today. And that's not the right one. One sec. That's interesting. Why it's not opening? Oh, there it is. Okay. Okay. So why would a region want to be part of anti-human sex trafficking? And so just to give you a little history on the region of Peel, we're an upper tier government. And I'm not sure what's going on here, but as an upper tier government, we are, okay, it's like it's not coming up here. Okay, they're slowly coming. They're slowly coming. I think they're just being downloaded. So I'll start the conversation. So as an upper tier government, we have three municipalities underneath the region of Peel. That's Brampton, that's Mississauga, and the town of Caledon. There's 1.5 million people in the region of Peel. There's 8% of poverty. 16% of that 18% are children in poverty under the limb. We have lots of complexities. Right now, we're dealing with continental and East African asylum seekers who are coming and entering into the GTA. We're in Ontario, we're close to Hamilton, and so complexities are very similar. We have a lot of pathways that are blocked within our social service systems, whether it's mental health and addictions. Um, and so in 2016, one of the counselors came and actually was at the airport because we have a lot of highways that all sort of come into where we are at the region of Peel. And one of the counselors actually went to go pick someone up and saw that there was a motel very close to where they were going to pick the person up. And they found that they saw lots of cars coming and going. They weren't sure what was going on. And so they sort of brought it back to the region and regional council and staff and said, we want somebody to explore human sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And like Sam said, we have a lot of international students that actually are a big revenue stream in the region of Peel. We have 70% racialized population, predominantly South Asian and Black. It's a middle class because like it's new homes. They're definitely like Hamilton. We have a lot of poverty there. Okay. So in 2017, uh, there's a Peel Human Trafficking Committee and of service providers of over 40 providers in Peel and GTA who got together and their social service, their health, their legal agencies, and they delegated to the region of Peel to say there's gaps in the system for human trafficking. And so, with that, regional council asked staff to look at what those gaps were. And we did an extensive literature review. We worked with community about those gaps. And the gaps that we saw was, and nothing new, lack of client pathways. We really didn't see any pathways for victims of human trafficking. There was no navigation. Um, no dedicated housing. So you're talking about housing, you're talking about transition housing, you're talking about safe housing. And then what are the pathways to permanent housing? And so there was nothing there. And there really wasn't, like, there were more barriers to exit than there were opportunities. And then there weren't any proactive prevention levers. So what do we have there to educate? Like, private and non-private, because it is really intersected that way. We have to make sure that everybody understands what human sex trafficking is. And so, in 2018, the region of Peel endorsed a strategy, and it was a three-pronged strategy. And it included the first one's prevention, which is really looking at increased awareness of human sex trafficking, intervention, improving access to dedicated, reliable services for victims. And that really is an integrated hub approach. So, you guys were talking again about the health services and the community coming together. And then exit housing. So, provide dedicated, safe, and supportive housing for victims and survivors. And when we formed the strategy, we made sure it was evidence informed. We made sure it had a survivor focused lens on it. As well as we wanted to make sure that the recommendations of the final report on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and the National Task Force on Sex Trafficking of Women and Girls in Canada was respected and included. So we also embedded equal access to high quality services for all individuals at risk. We took an equity lens approach because we are a racialized population in the region of Peel. Harm reduction focus, trauma and violence informed lens to all our pathways. And we also looked at making sure that we included the survivor at the center. It was critical. We talked to the survivors as to what the strategy looks like and how we're going to move forward with it. Oh, wrong one. Okay. So I'm going to start with the prevention pillar. And I know we're here to talk about housing and homelessness, but these three pillars don't work well if they're not done together in sequence. You heard Sam say that it takes 7 attempts for someone, or 7 years. Sometimes it could be longer for someone to exit human sex trafficking. So really important that we had an integrated approach and really good pathways to all our service providers. And so the prevention pillar was co-created with a community approach, with the Peel Human Trafficking Survivor Provider Committee, and a set of prevention-related goals that supported the committee's overall outcomes. The purpose of the prevention pillar is to increase awareness, education of human sex trafficking, and through education and community engagement, student education and awareness. And so with this, our rationale around our approach is to really raise awareness regarding commercial sex exploitation of people at risk, including children, in and among foster and group homes, elementary schools, high schools, parents, guardians, hospitals, hospitality, and transportation industries. We also want to make sure we allowed for a quicker way to identify people at risk in all of those different areas and really enable increased knowledge of available and appropriate supports for victims and survivors, which is the most important. And we've been really lucky with this approach. And I can say to you, we've been 3 years in, I think, even though we did start in COVID too. So I do understand that we've been able to do prevention education through an online module for the region of Peel. They have 5,000 staff, and 81% of those frontline staff have been trained on it. So whether it's early years, whether it's Ontario Works, whether it's housing and homelessness caseworkers. So we've really taken that approach, and Sam's been instrumental in that work. We've also gone externally. And so we've also been able to really provide the same module and the same education and prevention to the 3 municipalities. So to trickle that approach down, because they too are seeing people come through rec centers, social programming, in neighborhoods. And so we've been really successful that way. We've almost like 3,000 staff have been trained in those 3 municipalities. They're also looking to implement this as mandatory training. That's what we would like to happen. I know that's what Sam advocates for. Okay. I don't know why it's not happening. Okay. So the Encourage Hub, which is our intervention pillar. And this is really a critical piece. I'm not sure if Danny's in the audience today, but in 2020, the region was successful in securing funding from the provincial government for the Encourage Hub. And it's part of the Ontario Anti-Human Sex Trafficking Strategy 2020 to 2025. We've been really successful to help, and the purpose of the pillars to increase access to dedicated wraparound services that are easy to navigate for victims and survivors. It utilizes a trauma-informed, survivor-centered lens. Our priorities are the needs and the experiences and the risks of human sex trafficking. The Encourage Hub operates in collaboration with our community partners, and they are Our Place Peel, Elizabeth Fry, Hope for Women, and Catholic Family Services of Peel and Dufferin. It provides core services to those victims. And so since our inception, I can give you a little bit of a client profile because I think that's important. And I heard you guys talk about data, right? So we've been really trying to make sure that we're collecting that data so we could expand the program within the 3 regions. And so 45% of the clients are 25 years or older. 34 between the ages of 18 and 24, 10% are 16 and 17 years old, 11% are the ages of 12 and 15, and can come through the pathways like Peel Children's Aid. And I just want to reflect because I know Sam and I found a stat, and like the Stats Canada in 2021 reported that 1 in 4 or 25% of victims of human sex trafficking are under the age of 18. It's pretty staggering. Um, we also have 92% of our clients identify as female, 4% didn't want to disclose, 3% identify as non binary, and 1% transgender. 39% of are racialized, with the largest population being Black, African, Caribbean, 29% as North American, 23% as white, and that's European or North American, 4% Indigenous, and 4% South Asian. Okay, so, I didn't know I didn't have it up. Sorry. Let me just see if I can. Current slide. Okay. So this is our safe house. It's absolutely beautiful, and we're super proud of it. And I know we're here to talk about housing. So our exit and housing pillar is really critical. We have both transition and safe housing. And, it's funded. These houses were funded through the region. So we were lucky to advocate for those houses. And really, the pillar is there to increase access to dedicated, safe, and supportive housing for victims and survivors. The houses are in partnership with Elizabeth Fry, our community partner, and it operates an emergency safe house and a transition house. The emergency safe house, which is called the Bonnie McPhee House, provides immediate secure housing for up to 6 females. And they identify they could be 16 years or older, and can stay up to 6 months. The Peel Transition House provides transitional housing in the same population for up to 24 months. With both a safe and transition house open during the height of pandemic, we saw lower numbers. So we definitely had to go down to 50% occupancy based on the regulations there. So I can say it was quite difficult during COVID for us. And so just some stats. So we opened the Safe House in April 2020. We served 40 clients. We opened the Transition House in 2021. We served 18 clients. But I can tell you that since we were able to bring our occupancy levels back up, we have seen a real increase in referrals. And I know right now we have 42 referrals for both the Safe and the Transition House. One of the things I want to let you know is we have an open door policy. They don't have to be from Peel. So we do work collectively, even in Hamilton. I know we worked and helped survivors be housed. And we think that it's pretty critical that we keep that policy. So I'm going to pass it back to Sam to quickly end the presentation.
I'm going very quickly here. Thank you so much, and thank you all. So how can we support victims, survivors, and individuals at risk? We don't need to reiterate that lack of housing significantly increases the risk of being vulnerable, but providing safe, low barrier, dedicated housing for individuals is incredibly important. Start out small. If you have one bed that you can dedicate on a female floor, we're building out a protocol right now, looking at different pathways to provide safe beds. We're working with police, but they have access to 10 beds. And so we're working with various different service providers with victim services. They have hotel rooms, which is not the best, considering many people are trafficked in hotel rooms. But looking at choice, and I think, again, individuals require choice. They're the expert in their experience. We are not the experts. We do not come in and save anybody. We need to trust that individuals know their situation, but to provide opportunities where individuals have that choice to say, I haven't had a good experience here. Can we do this? Even in our sexual assault center, we're 24/7, but our service center is in the hospital, but we don't use it all the time. So come, sit, have a safe place to sleep, even if it's just for the night until we can coordinate something different. But it's really about looking at pathways that are innovative to be able to kind of look at things a little bit differently. So we're working now on the safe bed protocol, a provincial housing working group for reciprocal referrals. Individuals may not feel safe to be in their own community. They might not be feel safe to be with individuals that they identify with culturally either. Again, they are the experts, and we want to provide choice. And a survivor-led advisory committee, which is near and dear to my heart. And the reason why we haven't gotten that up off the ground yet is we're putting together a remuneration framework. Individuals that provide their expertise need to be remunerated appropriately as experts, as any other consultant. And so it's really important for us to bring that forward. We are also advocating so hard to make sure that these types of models are used by government because they have the ability to do so, and they should be a part of the solution. So we've worked with the special rapporteur on modern contemporary forms of slavery. We were just invited to speak with the special rapporteur, as well as various different social service organizations. Various different pockets. So we met with the standing committee on the status of women. So that's all federal MPs talking about this model and talking about ways that it can be implemented in every community across Canada. We just need to look at those pathways that are already there and have not been used traditionally to serve a population that's incredibly vulnerable. And it speaks, your session spoke to me because it's exactly that. It's those barriers. We also did a podcast recently with a survivor, and it's called Peel Talks Housing. There's a bunch of resources here as well. Feel free to reach out too. You can tell that we're very passionate about this work, and anything that we can do to share resources, evidence, data, anything that we can do, we really want to do that, and help you kind of with our lessons learned and promising practices. So thank you very much again.
Thank you both so much. That was brilliant. I know we're essentially right at time, so if you have to go, no problem. If you want to stay, our panelists open to stay for another 5-10 minutes. So don't feel bad if you have to go, but if you want to stay and ask a question or engage in conversation, we'd love to have you here too. Does anyone have a question for the panelists? Yeah.
It's a two-part presenter. Which all spoke about exactly what I was thinking so much. Just yeah, for the first venture, I love your conversation around low barrier support. I was incredibly privileged to be able to work in one Vancouver that was for women and families. What we also saw is that folks needed some sort of flexibility to also be able to exit at a different point in their lives when they might not want no barrier anymore, especially those with families. And unfortunately, our model is BC housing, and of course, BC housing is scared everyone. uh, but it was challenging because they were really like they had to stay within within a site that was in the downtown east side when they no longer felt that they wanted to be part of that community. Um, but also for the second presenters, again, this is what we need, and thank you so much. I actually work with Covenant House in Vancouver, and this is one of the strategies that we are trying to do. And yeah, it really what we saw over the last 3 years is that whether you intend to or not, if you're providing services for folks experiencing homelessness, you'll be providing for services for folks at risk experiencing or those who've survived trafficking and exploitation. So, my big question, I think, for the second presenters is how would you recommend getting a municipality on board so it's really pioneered and pushed forward by a municipality rather than kind of ad hoc, siloed nonprofits?
Yeah. I would say the number one thing is getting a counselor on board because, like, in the municipalities, like, we're a upper tier government. But I would say, and Sam can speak to it too, we had a counselor who was so passionate about this work. She brought it on the floor continuously. And really, that's how housing came about. Like to have a regional government and a lower tier municipality give two houses. Like they gave two houses. We did receive provincial dollars in our 3-year pilot, upwards of 2 million, but you know that's not enough. It's not going to be enough. And you know, our role as the regional government is there to advocate. I mean, we do have a box because we are a bit of bureaucrats, even though we're very social service forward. And but I think the only way is to work, I would say the counselors and the not-for-profits work alongside each other to continue to delegate and advocate. And like even for me, because I take care of all the not-for-profits in Peel right now, food security is everywhere. It's through the roof. I mean, I've been to the food banks and, you know, I see the working poor in their cars coming. And then the ones that are living rough are kind of being pushed aside. And like it's just getting really contentious there. And so like the only way to do it is for me to bring those counselors there and say, you need to see this. And, you know, and I can only say that through that advocacy, I was able to get an additional 4 million for the food banks in Peel for 2 years and do a proof of concept. I also agree with data. Like if you don't have data, unfortunately, it's the worst thing because it's not always like what agencies want to do. They want to service, they want to be on the front lines, they want to be helping, they don't want to be counting and asking the same person who's been asked that question 100 times in a day. But unfortunately, like I think for us, we've been really great relationships. You talked about great relationships here, like and going into the community. I think for us, as a regional government, people were surprised at the relationships we have with clients and with the community providers, like really hearing their pain and then figuring out how to activate. But it starts, unfortunately, local governments. It's the counselors. I don't know what to say. I wish it wasn't, but it is for us.
Any other folks with questions? You do. Great. We have a mic coming to you. Thanks so much.
Hello. Um, um, so my question is, well, I'm excited to read. Did you say the report might be available? The ones from the Hamilton? Yeah. Awesome. I can't wait to read that. Yeah, my question is about so like I in Manitoba, Winnipeg is where I'm from. I actually supervise a transition low barrier transitional housing. So of course it's an interest of mine. But we've only been kind of running it the way we're running it in the last 2 years. Before that, we had transitional housing with different fundings that had different requirements over the years. Um, so I guess my question is maybe two. One is there currently transitional housing that is low barrier offered in Hamilton? And my other question was, is it a question really? Sorry. Or it's kind of a question comment, but regarding it was said that maybe I don't know if it was research or found in lit reviews about uh, individuals or female identified gender diverse folks stating that the transition of going from like living rough to being housed is it's tough, like they have the shock, and we've been noticing that, but I was just wondering if there has like if your literature or there's like been anything written about that, if you came across that, or if it's been like interviews with people that you've spoke with. That was two questions. I hope you remember them.
I'll do the second question and then maybe Mary can speak about transitional housing. For women who are being housed and who have been living rough and haven't been housed for a while, have been chronically homeless, we kind of have a process where we take our time. We just don't kind of throw it at them and here it is. And we really have kind of a bit of a educational we take a few steps to, we show it to them, we talk about it, we talk about the differences. So it's a very open conversation about the transition that they're about to embark. And, you have to be ready, and are you ready? And that, kind of getting them housing ready in emotionally ready. And then finding ways to maintain some of the supports that they've had and making sure that they stay linked with us. And I think a lot of them think that once they're housed, they lose all of the support that they've had. And that's a misnomer. We know that's not true. So that's the value of the drop in, is that once they are housed, they still have the drop ins to come back and, stay supported. And as well as one of the benefits of the drop-ins is once they're housed, they could still come to us and do laundry and eat and do all of those things, so they can save money, from their housing. So, yeah, and I'll turn it over to Mary.
So, in terms of your question of is there low barrier transitional housing in Hamilton, there's not for the population that ours is focused on. So there is transitional living. There's a few different sites, but the VI SPDAT score, the higher the VI SPDAT score is, I don't know if you use that in your province. Yeah.
But I'm that like you're required to use it. But you're right. Sometimes the score is high. I try to do that myself, but the person's already had it done.
Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah, the score is really high, but I try to move through to figure out why it's so high. And I meet with them, and sometimes I decide because I don't think it's right to base it just on that.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I have admitted someone that score is higher because when I read it, there's like, yeah, it would be fine still for them. It also feels, I feel a little bit, I don't really like, it's a hard thing. I just decide to get slaughtered. Okay, sorry.
No, you're totally right. So I
Do it and I don't follow it.
yeah, so there's just nothing for people who score the highest, and I'm sure that's across the country, really. And
Okay, I don't want to keep everyone from lunch, but if so, maybe I'm going to close the questions now. But if you have burning questions for the panelists, they'll be up here. Come and say hi. Thanks so much for joining us.